Chamber strings is just like the exact kind of right number of instruments to fit the different styles of Pulp. Having the strings there and sounding really good immediately meant that we kind of created space for them in the arrangement, rather than, as a kind of afterthought at the end. So I think it made them fairly integral to a few of the songs on the album. My name is Richard Jones. I'm a viola player, string arranger, keyboard player, and play a bit of guitar. And I'm the strings MD for Pulp. Today we're rehearsing for Tramlines, which is obviously a big show for Pulp in the hometown. And we are experimenting with a kind of hybrid setup where we're using real strings plus the samples that I'm using on keyboards, which is mostly chamber strings. It's an interesting one. I think what I've chosen to do for this is I've got more of the live players playing the top line and I'm using the samples to kind of fill in the gaps between them. It was slightly kind of forced upon us by the size of the stage, so we couldn't have our usual size string section, but it's great that chamber strings kind of provides a solution for this kind of like, situation where we have to kind of adapt. The new album was written over the course of about 9 months, basically during 2024, and then we recorded it at the end of 2024. And the way that it was written was that the whole band, including me, was rehearsing in a practice room, and so we would put songs together kind of live and we would work on songs sort of as a band in a group. As opposed to like a string quartet, we can get some fairly like heavy textures when we need them, but they can also be pretty transparent and, and smooth pop sounding textures. I would have chamber strings on my laptop and on 2 keyboards so that throughout the writing process we could incorporate the string arrangements kind of from the beginning. So like the very first ideas for like what we were going to orchestrate the songs with sort of came from chamber strings. It's unusual to work that way for me. Normally you kind of get, as a string arranger, normally you get called in kind of at the end of the process, but we kind of integrated that right through the writing process all the way from the beginning.
My name's Matthew Miller. I am keyboard tech for Pulp, amongst others. I think the primary thing that Spitfire has helped us do this time is change the way that we approach performing when we can't bring the string section with us. Because what the general route is in that circumstance, and has been historically, is you take the album stems, you throw a click track underneath them, and you run it in Pro Tools or in Ableton, and the band play along to a tape, essentially. And in some situations that works well, but it can also be quite limiting. It can be a bit of a straitjacket on the expression that the band can actually perform with.
Yeah, I think live, it's got that range of kind of emotional qualities. So like I said, like quite a kind of transparent sense of vib sound and like a flautando sound, which I like using in Pulp stuff, because actually Pulp stuff kind of goes into quite a kind of experimental kind of almost like kind of improvised texture quite a lot of the time, sort of on maybe sort of less well-known songs. A lot of the structures are about sort of building a texture and building a groove. There's enough kind of within chamber strings that I can sort of pull it back from being like overly heavy-handed, which I've found like other sample libraries that I've used are just sort of automatically quite heavy, which is good sometimes, it's brilliant sometimes. But yeah, there's this kind of, we can still get that with chamber strings, but we can also get this very transparent and light quality, which I really like. The control of kind of vibrato intensity, that's like a really important feature that we've managed to incorporate when we use it live and when I've been working on the arrangements in the rehearsal room. So I kind of feel like you have a real sort of control of sort of the emotional pull of the strings, you know, like, which is, I think sometimes if there's a kind of vibrato setting kind of stuck on, it kind of puts the strings in a certain place, whereas I really like a kind of senza vib sound, and we can kind of move between that and a kind of more traditionally romantic sound using chamber strings.
Having the Spitfire strings means that rather than having a tape machine that's playing the same thing every night, we actually have a human being performing. And that's made a really, really big difference. And Pulp are, and have always been, no two shows are the same. Jarvis is interacting very, very strongly with the audience, and the way that the audience respond to the band affects how they play. Everything gets played differently every night, and with Richard playing things from Spitfire string libraries, they're able to be a live ensemble rather than just a regular metronomic same thing every night. We tried quite a few things before we arrived at Chamber Strings, and the whole thing with me and Rich has been a bit of a voyage of discovery, and we've been through quite a few different iterations, and it's been quite interesting finding out what works, what doesn't work, what is effective in a small room through a pair of studio monitors compared to what is effective in a, you know, headlining a festival and with a huge crowd, and also another 10 people in the band, you know. So very often it's about finding a space. With some of the other solutions we tried, as I say, it would sound fantastic through a pair of studio monitors, and then it would either disappear when it was in a large environment. Some things would overwhelm and be in the way of other things. But for us, the Chamber Strings has sat in a nice set of frequencies, and it occupies exactly the right space in the mix but leaves room for the rest. And there are many other elements in the Pulp show, so it sits very, very nicely within a mix and covers the ground that you want from a nice warm sort of vibrant string section sound, and it does that very well.
Yeah, I think chamber strings seems to balance all of those things of, you know, you can get some heavy sounds when you want, but I'd say a kind of, because I think it's approximately a sort of 12-piece section, and we use a 10-piece section live when we have real strings. So it's very similar to what we use for live. So I think it just replicates a kind of pop string section sound, kind of about as close as you can to the real thing.
We're hosting everything in Mainstage. Obviously, we have to go very quickly from one song to the next, and in some songs, Richard's got 5 or 6 different patches for different sections of the song. That's very important, and there's ways of setting Mainstage up so that it's not, every time you switch to a new song or to a new section, it's not pulling enormous stuff off the drive. So it's about setting it up within Mainstage so that as much of it is sitting in RAM, ready to go, and then we can flick very quickly from one thing to another. Because it's fine to be able to have a system as a composer, which maybe takes, you know, minutes to load, and then you have this enormous canvas and it's fantastic. But if you need to switch very quickly, and switching from one song to the next in the gig is one thing, but in a sound check, we might play a verse and a chorus of one song and then move on to the next, and we might do that for 6 songs in a row. So it's even quicker than, you know, the length of a song. We have to be able to jump very, very quickly, and it is working so far. This has been really not a crash course for me, but it's been a real opportunity to dive deep on the string side. I'd be fascinated to look at a lot of the pianos and a lot of those sort of things, to try and really build up the sort of ultimate set of paints that people could use. For me, it's a case of finding some time and then working through some of the libraries and seeing what they've got to offer.
Yeah, the patchwork set at Glastonbury was, yeah, definitely like a sort of life highlight, I would say. We'd known about it for kind of 4 or 5 months, so it was really hard to keep that a secret, you know, from people. But yeah, it was amazing, and yeah, we used chamber strings for a bunch of songs in it, and yeah, just like looking out over the crowd and sort of looking up and seeing the dome of the pyramid. Well, it's not a dome, it's a point, but yeah, it was amazing. The advice I would give is, yeah, get really used to the vibrato control, because to me that's the kind of like, that's what separates this from other types of string samples that that I've used. And you know, if you can really kind of get that under control, in whether you're, you know, we've got a way of doing it live or in your programming, if you're a composer, then you know that's I'd say that's the way to kind of really harness what this can do. And yeah, I really love the performance patch on it. It's very responsive, and you learn the articulations of how to play that kind of as you would an instrument almost. Yeah, I kind of use a combination of the legato patch on one keyboard and then an ensemble patch on another keyboard. So I can get nice sort of connected lines whilst keeping a harmony below, and I have them on separate volume pedals for expression. So with all of those things, you can get a pretty realistic, I think, and expressive performance.
For me, it seems like, particularly with the new line of Apple things, my job used to be constantly about stripping things down, simplifying things, and making it possible to perform without the laptop falling over. The new Apple Silicon seems to be unbelievably forgiving in how much you can throw at it. And we have tried to break it. We really have tried to make Mainstage collapse, and touch wood, and it's a terribly tempting fate thing to say, but so far it's been surprising how much we've thrown at it, and it's managed to just keep on going. And for us, it does open up this huge world of, like I say, where you would previously just throw everything on track. That's becoming a bit of an old-fashioned way of doing things now. For some shows, it's perfect, and for some sort of very choreographed pop shows, that's great, and it's the way to do it. But for a band that performs live, to be able to not have to do that is really exciting, and to be able to help a band play live rather than help a band cheat is really great, you know. And it feels like a bit of a new era, and it's great to be a part of that.